Hi, my name is Ken Lasterson. I wrote the Microbiome prescription website, and I'm trying to answer a reader's question who wrote me, and it became a bit of an interesting answer, and I thought it'd be good to do a video on it with a blog post so other people can share the perspective. Um, on the blog, you can see basically she compared two analyses between two samples, and the result was that the comparison showed a small improvement of one and a bunch of deterioration. Uh, and her take of it was, I feel differently, not really better, but not much worse either. So it was sort of either or. And when we look at the number, we can see why she sort of felt the same, no, not a major improvement, which is what the purpose of the comparison. And she's concerned, not sure how to determine result. For example, she has bitter nausea, migraine, constipation, worse brain fog, etc. So she has MCAS is improving, but and continues to progressively worsen. So the question is, what can we explain to her what's going on, and ideally identify better how to improve things. So there are suggestions to food, etc. Her subjective was a subjective perception of a change, but not an improvement, which means that something has been altered, and for something to be altered is largely the goal. The goal is to cause the microbiome to do a course shift. Once it does a course shift, then you need to do another course correction and another one. And I know from own personal experience, sometimes it takes 5 or 6 or 7 tests. And with each one doing course direction, sometimes the course direction cause you almost have whiplash because suddenly what was to be avoided is to take, and what is to take is to avoid. And that is because the microbiome is evolving, and as it evolves, then we have to nudge it different ways. So it's a bit of a little thing. So let's go down and look at the sample comparison. You can read the full message there. And here we have there all her symptoms, and we see what the old value was, and we see one thing, there was a real major improvement from 82 percentile to 51 percentile. Basically, that is a sweet improvement. But everything else is about the same. But notice that all of them are relatively close to each other, from basically 80 to 85, 80 to 85, etc. So things have gone downhill a bit. 150 has gone down here a bit, and one has shown marked improvement, which corresponds to her subjective measurements. And she does have 157 items to take care of. So the fact that she noticed changes, but the test results sort of isn't that particularly clear to her, cause her to raise the questions. Okay, feeling the same with minor changes not unexpected. Remember, you're tending to, okay, remember, when we're dealing with how you remember things were, we tend to be very unreliable. Especially with brain fog, you can't really remember how you were 2 or 4 weeks ago, or 6 or 8 weeks ago. And that was one of the challenges I encountered with people who couldn't quite remember. And I found that this comparison table ended up giving what seems to be pretty reliable correction. And in this case, it seems to be reliable. Some things are worse, a couple of things are better, which is exactly what's there. But overall, more things are worse than better, which is not desirable. Okay, now at this point, I want to go on and just do a quick recap of what microbiome prescription has or does. Is basically getting suggestions is easy. Picking which bacteria to get suggestions from is the hard part. Microbiome prescription constantly updates. In fact, later today I'll be reviewing all the latest studies for the last week manually after some machine filtering to reduce the number of amount of work to be done. And we ended up with a database just over 7.4 million modifiers to bacteria relationship. That is, this substance is known to increase or decrease this bacteria according to a published peer-reviewed studies. That generally is a lot more than most medical practitioners of any caliber can possibly remember in their mind, and it's constantly getting bigger and bigger and bigger. At one time when I started, it was just 2 million. Now we're up to 7.4. 2 3 years from now, I expect it to be 15 million to 20 million different things. Now, if I know which bacteria you want to change and how much weight to give them, then it's a relatively simple calculation to calculate these are what you should be doing and this is what you should be avoiding. That is the easy part. That is real sweet, easy, straightforward. We have the data, and for every suggestion, we can provide you a link back to the study. So there's absolutely there. Where we hit the problem is identifying which bacteria are out of whack and how much are they out of whack. So for that one, I want to go on and start with sort of the old school. You go to a typical alternative health practitioner, be it a naturopath or a functional medicine or some other type, and you describe a problem, and often they won't even ask for testing. They will simply say, "Oh, okay, this is I see what the problem is. You don't have enough of this particular probiotic is usually where it goes." Um, and they will speculate on the issue, give suggestions, and then will swear it works. It works for everybody else. In reality, what I've observed is that generally it works for all the people they gave the suggestion to who came back into their office again. Which is okay, yes, it worked for those people. But those who it didn't work from, generally the people who said, no, it's not worth going back to the person again. So all the negative reports are filtered for financial reasons away from the person. So they end up in a alternative reality and not working there. Me, I want to work from the microbiome test because it's both more reliable and more predictable. So now the question is, okay, which is a bad bacteria? Well, testing labs will provide a reference range for some, but not all bacteria, and that's to identify if you are above or below this range. Then we want to correct this bacteria or correct that bacteria. Okay, that's nice. That's good. Nice and simple. Okay, are you in a reference range? No. Are you above or below? Yes. Okay, that's the bacteria you want. That's a that was at one time how I was working from it. Before I looked deeper into the data and realized there are problems. There are many technical issues about it, but let's take a look. Here we have, and this is on old UI sitting there, and you can go and say, okay, which bacteria do you want to use? And then it will take a look at the reference ranges for those bacteria and identify which bacteria are outside those reference ranges. There are problems with it. There are tons of problems. First one is every lab identifies bacteria in a different manner. We could give each of these labs, and this is what I learned by actually doing my same digital microbiome sample. The data that came from the lab in this case it was uBiome, and I could go in and have asked them to process my digital file. A digital file. It's not a sample. It's a digital file taken from a sample. So you go in and I did it and went and asked them to process it and look at their report, and reality hit me in the face very hard. No two labs reported the same results. They don't even report similar results, and that's because of a absolutely horrendous lack of standardization. And every company believes they are doing the best thing and everybody else is wrong, but there's no government standards. In fact, I talked to Scott Jackson, who used to head the National Institute of Science and Technology microbiome testing facility, and as he wrote, you give me one digital sample report, the digital data from a sample, and you will get 92 different answers, all of them did different amounts, different bacteria, absolute chaos, which is why I tend not to use these. If you are using those specific tests, then okay, yes, you are reasonably good, but you cross reference your test results with a different company's test results reference ranges, is generally, it can be done, but it's not there. The things are there simply because people ask for them, and I want to be accommodating to people. I don't know what the correct answer is, but I want to be friendly towards people to, to allow people to do things how they want to do it. And I will advocate what I think is the best way. I will not force my best way on them. I'll leave people to come to their own conclusions. Okay, so we have all those things, and those are all on the old menu, and you can just go in and make use of them. And if you want and try it, but again, the problem is you are basically using a imperial liquid of measurement against metric units of measurements, or in some cases, oh, how many gallons are in 5 papaya? Um, does it compete disjunctive? Wait a minute, how can you determine what size of papaya? I don't know. I wonder how many gallons are in 5 papaya is what you end up in reality saying, and when you understand what the issues are, frequently the question becomes literally nonsensical. But until you understand it, it seems reasonable. Hey, things like ships are measured in elephants. Now, are they Indian elephants or African elephants? Which both have different average rates. And what and it's a male elephant or a female elephant. So we just get into more and more complexities. Okay, now the result of feedback was I ended up creating a very simple UI to hide all the old classic stuff so that people can use things better. And the three main ones is to go and make one of these three choices. Novice, which means it'll just look at everything and using the reference ranges recalculated using data from other people using the same lab. We go or use symptoms, in which case we go and use the symptoms we have with other people using the same lab to identify what bacteria seems to be associated with the symptoms. And then we use the PubMed study, and PubMed study is problematic because the studies are done using different methods, which may get different results than what your lab results with. It's the lack of standardization problem. Again, it's there because some people feel much better when you can say, okay, this medical study says this is too high. In reality, it's only is too high if you're using a specific lab processing strain. If you do different lab process, a different bacteria would be too high or too low, which means it's a challenging headache to sort out. But as you can see the count, if you do novice, you get 82. If you go by symptoms, you get 39. 39 is relatively high. Most of the time, the numbers is 20. But remember, she had over 150 symptoms, which means you get a whole bunch of matches up for different symptoms. If she had only 50, I would expect somewhere about 20 bacteria identified. The rough count is roughly one third the number of symptoms is the number of bacteria identified because all the symptoms are related to each other. And then the PubMed is using their formal name of what diagnosis or disease you have and not the specific symptoms. Personally, I prefer using symptoms because symptoms are actually more concrete, and most of the time people don't know the exact medical description, or even if they've been told by the MD, often MDs take shortcuts and say, oh, it looks like, and makes that the official diagnosis, even though a deeper analysis will find that that's not what you have. You don't meet the official criteria. So in general, beginner symptoms is the one which I advocate using. Put in your symptoms, and then we can identify the bacteria associated with those symptoms, and those are the ones you want to focus on because those are the ones which, if you correct, are likely to reduce your symptoms. I have a new algorithm in development, literally in development. It's on my development machine, and I ran this person's data from. I end up with just two, not 82 or 39, but two very critical bacteria. Two bacteria which probably drives all the other symptoms, um, mainly because of the secondary effect. So we have two critical bacteria, we have 20 minor bacteria. We have a much more targeted, which to me is good, targeted selection of bacteria we want to adjust, which means we have less having to do counter indicated things. We can be much more focused. And the goal of the bacteria is to pinpoint. Now, when I ran through this person's samples, this Microbiome with a weight of 109, everything else was weights of 10. 109 came way, way too high, and it was high on both her earlier test and current test, which means that this particular bacteria is the most probable cause for all of her symptoms. Not directly causing all symptoms, but causing changes of the bacteria that causes her symptoms. The interesting thing is another bacteria suddenly jumped up to a value of 92 with the second sample. And the second sample is when things went worse. So we can see that this one is probably there. And the Morgana bacteria family. So I went over and asked Perplexity about, since she indicates she has mast cell infection syndrome, are these two one associated with histamine or that? And the answer is, guess what? Yes, which is sort of interesting, particularly Morgana, which is a subspecies, which may or may not have been actually accurately tested for using biome site data. That's always a problem, which is clinical studies uses one method, retail microbiome tests use other methods, and sometimes they do not identify the same thing the same way or get the same name. But we do find that they are histamine producers, and one of them, both of them, are basically pretty strong indicators of what the issue the person is fighting, which is sweet. It's sweet that it came out with mast cell activation syndrome and histamine issues, and the two bacteria identified by the new methodology happen to hit them right on the nail as the major contributor. Let's get back to the other page. So what we have is we have the new method identifying the two bacteria, and those bacteria are strongly associated to mast cell activation, histamine, and a whole bunch of other related things, which means they are likely the correct way. And the fact that she got worse probably could be ascribed to the fact that the Morgana has being added to your sample. Going forward, I would look at what decreases these two bacteria. I went and ran the data through the suggestion algorithm, and I attached a full set of suggestions as Excel for download. And the new algorithm suggestion came up with the following things being suggestions. Among them, we have Lactobacillus plantarum here, and I then went down below and copy and pasted from the usual way of getting suggestions, and what we find is there's a lot of overlap. So that set of suggestions do not change greatly. They change some nuances, but the main changes seems to be in agreement between the old algorithms and the one I'm working on. The main difference is the new algorithms. It's far better for really focusing on the very critical bacteria that seems to be the root cause, which I'm actually quite excited for. It was what I would hope for, and so far in this person sample, as well as another post I'm working on, both cases, it is really identifying what the key bacteria involved are, because two or three or sometimes just one sticks out like a sore thumb compared to everything else. So at that point, I'm going to finish up and put that in. So basically, use the suggestions on the page there. What you may want to do is also go over and click on these two links, and those two links will take you to the reference page about what alters those two bacteria, and you want to go and see about decreasing it. For example, let's take a look at this one. And oops, okay, give me a second to get there. So it goes and gives a quick synopsis here of what is known. And the top thing comes from a chat GPT large language model. It just sort of was an easy way to fill out general information, and generally their information is reasonably reliable. Lots of referenceable information. And then we see how often it is a biome site is seeing, how it's seeing, um, it's seeing not too often in people, and the average is small, and the medium is small, and she has 0.02 as a medium, and she was above 0.02 for both. One, she was almost double that. So that ends up giving background, and now we have some numbers here which I'm not even sure where those coming from, but let's just go on. The generally they are associated with a couple things, but down the bottom is where you really want to do. What you want to do is click here and find out what decreases, and what we have is a whole stack of different antibiotics. But down up the top, we want to notice one thing is that antibiotic resistance, which means you may have to literally walk or rotate through several antibiotics to get this particular bacteria down. You can go on and say, okay, and we can go and say, okay, let's take a look at food, and we go and see, fruit fiber, all those are things produce honey, hops, yogurt, mushrooms. So you can go in and take a look at there and see about putting things. And of course, you don't want to do things that increases it. And let's go in and just type the word increase. And we have some surprises, like ginger increases it, high fat diet increases it, diet cola, um, ketogenic diet, blueberry. Again, most of these are single studies, which means not that reliable, but you need to balance the two of them out. Again, this is working off the best of what we have in terms of the literature. Okay, so returning to the post, that is basically it. Paul's suggestion list, the suggestion list will prioritize items which are connected to those two, or we may be associated to a proxy for those two bacteria. Bacteria which those two things influence to go too high or too low. And while we are treating what is acting as a proxy for these bacteria, it indirectly attracts. There's lots of interaction happening, and so that's basically it. So that's basically trying to answer the questions the person asked, and to explain why they may have problems, and more importantly, suggestions for trying to get those numbers improved. That's it.